You've tuned in to Heroes Wanted. I am your host, Joe Prim. The mission of this podcast is to equip fathers to abandon average and find discipline, confidence, and purpose by uncovering the hero within. I'm sure you can tell it in my voice. Once again, I am still under the weather, battling and fighting off some sort of virus that has tried to slow me down, and it has. But I am here once again to bring some thoughts, bring some ideas to you on the life of a great hero from the Bible, Gideon. This is the third part of this. I've dubbed the series Hero Theory. I think I will be doing a lot more episodes of Hero Theory throughout the year of different historical figures, maybe some more from the Bible, I'm not sure, but different people and see if we can support my theory that there are three challenges, three battles that we all must face in our life in order to uncover the hero within. Those three challenges, I believe, are fighting our fear, fighting our lies that we believe that hold us back, and the expectations of others. Now, are there little micro challenges or different parts or different situations that are unique to each of us and where we live and where we're at in our lives and the hero that's within us and how it has been buried? Yes. But I think that these three challenges are the three biggest challenges we each face. For Gideon, in the first episode, I talked about Gideon and him fighting fear and the lies. And the fear that he had was of the Midianites. The Midianites were a great nation and were really crushing the Israelites. They had the Israelites on their heels, living up in the hills, living in cliffs and clefts, and just trying to manage and maintain some sort of life under the thumb of this vicious foe. In the lie that Gideon believed that he threw out when an angel came to him and called him a mighty warrior and told him, "You are going to go out and kill the Midianites," and his response was a lie that had held him back. And that lie that held him back was that he was of the weakest clan and he was the youngest in his family. And although that's true, it didn't need to hold him back. It didn't need to be something in his life that kept him from moving forward, from progressing, from being the great and mighty warrior that God knew that he could be. And then in episode 2, we talked about the expectations of others and how those expectations hold us back. In the story of Gideon, the expectations of everybody else was along the same line of the lie that he believed that held him back. He had a role in his family to go thresh wheat in a wine press to make sure his family was fed. He had a role of the weakest clan and at the same time the youngest in his family. He had a very insignificant role in his family and a very insignificant role as a part of the clan and the leadership. Those were the expectations. And when he stepped outside of the egg carton that everybody felt comfortable with, when he stepped outside of the boundaries that everybody else had placed him in, and he had lived his whole life, when he stepped outside of that and decided, under God's guidance, to destroy an altar to Baal and build an altar to God, his people, the people of his clan, wanted to kill him. They wanted to end his life because he had stepped outside of his role. What he had done was right. What he had done was righteous. What he had done was good. But what happens when we step outside of those safety rails that everybody else has put around us and we have accepted, because we have safety rails that they put around us at our job and in our church and in our family and as a father and as a coach and in our neighborhood, we all have been put inside of this little egg cartons. And they might be different, the egg carton that you're put in or the little spot in the egg carton at work or at church or while you're coaching the neighborhood t-ball team. But nonetheless, You are inside of a spot where everybody feels comfortable. And the moment you step outside of that, one of two things will happen. Either people will embrace it because they accept it and want to be a part of that, or they will despise it and want to put an end to it. So the people in that area, his clan, despised it. They did not like the new Gideon. They wanted to end his life. But his father, on the other hand, apparently really liked the new Gideon. The Gideon who stepped outside of the egg carton. The Gideon that stepped outside of the boundaries that everybody else had put around him. And he defended his son with a very clever, very wise argument and was able to put the threats of death to an end at that point. The second thing that happens when we set outside of those expectations, outside of those boundaries, is that you will experience freedom. Freedom to not get angry when you used to get angry about things. Freedom to help others when you used to pass by. Freedom to fail. Freedom to grow. You will truly experience freedom. In the next episode that I record, I think I'm going to delve even deeper into these 3 challenges, because I think if we can grab onto these 3 challenges and see where we are at on those 3 challenges in different areas in our lives, we can make a very quick assessment and make some major changes very quickly in your life in order to get yourself moving in a different direction. This episode is going to be about Gideon and taking action, because there is only one way from point A to point B, and that is to take action. And on your way from point A to point B, there will be countless obstacles and difficulties. But you must keep going and moving forward. I've said it 1,000 times on these podcasts, whether it's walking, running, or crawling, you've got to keep yourself moving forward. And despite the naysayers, despite the fear, despite the doubt, despite the odds, despite the plan, despite those that rise against you, despite the rules, despite the setbacks, despite the chaos, despite the hate, you must move forward in your mission. So let's dive into the story of Gideon in taking action. I'm going to read right here from Judges chapter 7. Again, if you haven't had the opportunity to jump into this, it's only 2 short chapters in the Bible. Judges 6 and Judges 7 are basically cover all of Gideon's life. Go read this story for yourself. See what you can pick out of it. I've not read the whole thing on this podcast, just picking through the main parts of the story. So let me jump into it. So Gideon goes through, at the end of chapter 6, goes through kind of some testing, some deciphering, some understanding of God before chapter 7 begins. And in the Bible and kind of Christian lingo, they talk about laying out your fleece as Gideon did. And go check that out. Go read into that, because Gideon wanted to be sure that this is what God wanted him to do and not something that he was doing of his own selfish accord. So by chapter 7, Gideon is certain that this is the path that God has called him on. And a part of this certainty and a part of this Gideon stepping outside of the boundaries that had been created for him by his culture and by his family and by his clan and by those of influence was now all of a sudden there was a bunch of people around him that wanted to follow him into battle. That said, okay, Gideon, if you're going to lead this thing, if you're going to be a mighty warrior here, we're here to follow. But God often has a little bit different plan or a different version of the plan than what we're thinking going in. So here's Gideon surrounded by a lot of I don't know if they were all warriors. Probably not. I don't think it was very much of a warrior society there at that time. But people that said they were willing to fight. They understood what was at stake and believed in Gideon enough to at least be there and be counted. So it says, the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into your hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her, announce to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. So he had a pretty substantial group of men, of 32,000 men that had come to join him. The problem, 22,000 of those men, when told that they could leave if they were fearful, left. The warrior within had not been unburied. It was still hidden under the fear of the Midianites, that the Bible says in numerous areas outnumbered the sands of the sea, or were impossible to count. So it's a valid fear. The fears that you may have in your life can be valid fears too, but that does not mean that we can't rise up and take on them as a challenge. So now Gideon is left with 10,000 men. Over two-thirds of the men that once surrounded him are now gone. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water and I will sift them there. So they go down to the water, go down to the river, and I've heard different reasonings behind why God picked the people that he picked because of the way that they reacted. I'm not sure I buy into a lot of that stuff. You can dig into it on your own if you would like. But for whatever reason, 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths, while the rest got down on their knees and drank. So of the 10,000 men, almost all of them got down on their hands and knees at the river edge and drank like a dog, while 300 brought the water up to their mouth with their hands and drank out of their hands. And the Lord said to Gideon, with these 300 men that lapped out of their hands, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. So you can only imagine when you put yourself into this story where you go from the beginning of this day of surrounded by 32,000 men to now surrounded by 300 men. Quite a shift took place. And I find it very interesting because God understood that and took that into consideration here when he spoke to Gideon later that day. It says, if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So God was very clear in the fact that he understood that Gideon would be afraid. That even though he had fought through and he had come to a point where he would no longer fear the Midianites, that through their back and forth conversations, through the laying out of the fleece, and the understanding that this was what God wanted him to do, and then the stripping away of what seemed like the beginnings of a decent-sized army, God knew that fear could come back. Gideon didn't say he was going to quit. Gideon didn't threaten to walk away. Gideon didn't let his fear take control, but there was fear there, and God, in his own way, found a way here that we'll get into to quell those fears, and it puts it right here, and afterwards you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Like I said earlier, ridiculous amount of people, and he has 300 men. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. He says, I had a dream. He was saying, a round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, and it struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped God, returned to the camp of Israel, and called out, get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into our hands. Now there is the difference between having a fear and having defeat. Gideon didn't go into depression or defeat as these men around him disappeared, but he was reassured to continue moving forward. And as a great sign of leadership, I really like what Gideon says here. He says, watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. Leading by example. He was a new leader. These people had not followed him into battle many times before this. They were not a strong army that had done excursions, that had been through battles, that had fought together in the past. So he kept it very, very simple. Watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So they get these 300 people, these 300 warriors now that are with Gideon, and they surround basically three sides of this camp of the Midianites in this valley. And Gideon and the 300, they blow their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. They had torches, and inside of they had torches that were lit. And since it was dark out at night, they had covered up their torches with a vase or a jar, clay jar. So at the same time, they broke these glass jars or ceramic jars that were over the top of these torches. And it says, the three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hand and holding in their rights the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men around the camp to turn on each other with their swords, and the army fled. And so, as the army fled down the Jordan River, which is kind of where this valley went off into, they flee down the Jordan River, and as they're fleeing down the Jordan River, going down south, all the men of Ephraim were called out. And I find it very interesting because there's a little note here in my Bible about saying that they were called out and they were encouraged to turn by the turn of events, and many of those who had departed now joined the battle. So many of those that had left in fear earlier that day were offered an opportunity to redeem themselves and to face that fear with the Midianites, as the Midianites were fleeing in fear from the 300 men that had chased them out of the valley. So I do not know where you are in your life today, but I do know that there is a reason why you stumbled upon this little podcast of mine today. You cannot go from your point A where you are today to where you intend to be, from where God wants you to be, from where you want to be as a father, as a husband, as an employer. You cannot get to that place without taking action. And taking action at times is costly. Taking action at all times is going to be difficult. One thing that I find interesting is I read through these stories and find these great heroes, and so often it happens, especially with every man who's read the Bible's favorite story of King David, is we put ourselves into the position of the hero or anti-hero. And this, I believe, is the intent of story. This is the intent of the oral traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation before we were able to write and before people were able to read. Before any of that, stories and histories and understandings and lessons and morals and ethics were all passed down verbally through story. And the idea was that you put yourself into the shoes of that hero or that anti-hero to understand just a little bit without having to experience everything yourself, what it would be like to lead, what it would be like to be that hero, what things in life we want to be cautious of, what issues that jealousy leads to, or narcissism leads to, or wandering off into the woods lead to, right? A lot of fairy tales about children wandering off into the woods. There were reasons to those stories. They were warnings. But for some reason, there are many Christians that love to kind of crap on the idea of Christians putting themselves into the roles or looking at themselves as these different heroes in the Bible, or identifying with certain heroes or certain personalities or certain characters in the Bible, because they say, well, that's that person. That's not you. You don't compare. But I also want to then open up the idea that yes, this story was about Gideon, and he was the leader of that army. But he is not the only hero in this story. This story is filled with at least 300 others. At least 300 others that kept their hand raised when they said, those that are fearful can leave. They said, we're still here. So there's at least 300 that had said, nope, I'm willing to face my fear. Nope, I'm willing to stand up against the lies in my life. Nope, I'm willing to step outside of the expectations of everybody else that just sees me as a farmer, or only sees me as a carpenter, or only sees me as a blacksmith or a mason. I'm willing to step outside of those expectations because I see the value. And of those 300, they stayed and fought. They don't have any names, but each had their fears, their lies that they faced, and the expectations of others that they stepped outside of. And again, as I mentioned earlier on in the story, many of those that did leave out of fear, some point between where they were and where they were going, that fear dissipated enough for them to redeem themselves and then get back into the battle. And maybe that's where you find yourself in your life today. Maybe you feel like you're one of those 22,000 that said, no, you know what? You got me. I'm scared to be here. I'm trembling. I'm going back home. I don't really want to be a part of this. If you were going to force me, or if you had some kind of magic, or if you had some kind of super weapon here, or some kind of superhero was going to come down and fight with us, we could do this. But you know what? In all honesty, I'm afraid I'm out of here. And some of those that were down at the river and were not chosen to be part of the 300 for whatever reason, maybe they were feeling dejected. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe you thought you had said, I'll stick around and fight. In some point between the fight and everybody else leaving and quitting that said they were afraid, you were told, hey, we don't need you. We don't need you. You can go ahead and go home simply for the way you drank out of the river, whatever that meant. For some reason, God didn't choose that group of men to be a part of that 300. Maybe that's where you feel like you are today. I wasn't chosen to be part of that 300. They were each given an opportunity to redeem themselves or to be a part of the battle, to be a part of killing off these Midianites, being a part of bringing their leaders to justice, being a part of finding peace, finding a society that brought God back into them versus serving Baal. This wasn't just a battle of fighting the Midianites. This was a whole kind of rebuilding, retooling, reinventing of who and what Israel was once again. So even if you feel like you're part of Group A, or you're part of Group B that didn't get to be part of the main battle, you have opportunities to redeem yourself. You have opportunities to fight those fears, to fight the lies, and to step outside of those expectations of others. Still plenty of battles. There's still plenty of difficulties and trials and tough times up ahead for all of us. And either you can hang your head or you can get in the game. My hope is that you want to get in the game. My hope is that you want to be in the action. My hope is that you want to be in the arena fighting and battling for your wife, for your kids, for your community, for your congregation, and that you take that stuff seriously. I hope this podcast has a positive impact on you. I hope that you receive some value from this. If you do, I would ask you to do a couple of simple things for me. I know your time is valuable. This can make a tremendous impact for me and for all of us moving forward. And that would be that you would review this podcast, that you would subscribe to this podcast, and that you would share this podcast with somebody that you think it would benefit. I had got hit recently by some software snafus and some software that I was using and some disputes that I got stuck in the middle of. So I lost my Prepare.Defend.Lead page, and I lost my book funnels that were off of that. But you know what? That's okay for now. All that stuff can be rebuilt. It is what it is. It's not another challenge that I was wanting to take back on again, but it is what it is. We will move forward, right? Right now, pretty much everything I have is on Instagram at Prepare.Defend.Lead. You can find me there. You can direct message me there. You can also find me on Facebook. If you'd like to support the podcast, if you'd like access to, since my book funnel is down, I'm giving away the PDF copy of my book, Open, 6 Life-Changing Principles, as well as access to 180 plus episodes of Ever Vigilant, which was my original podcast. You can go to ko-fi.com/heroes wanted. That's coffee.com/heroes wanted. You can go there. You can make donations through the podcast, but you can also get a free copy of my book and, like I said, the podcast and a few other things there. if you are at a point in your life where you're feeling lost, where you're feeling overwhelmed by the fears and the lies and the expectations of others, and you're not sure where to begin or where to start or what it looks like to uncover the hero within, send me an email because my website's down. I apologize. Send me an email, direct message me, or DM me on Facebook or on Instagram. I do one-on-one coaching program, and I have a 12-week program that's designed specifically for that. And if in 12 weeks you don't feel more confident, you don't feel more disciplined, and you don't have a purpose in your life, I will give you your money back. That's my bold promise to you on my coaching program. Again, Instagram at Prepare.Defend.Lead. You can find me on Facebook at Prepare.Defend.Lead or at Joe Prim. And you can find me at ko-fi.com/Heroes Wanted. You can find links to all of those in the show notes for this podcast to make it simple for you. As always, men, hold fast and God bless.